conditions during Thursday. A few showers will affect northern England, where it will also be blustery. Much of the south dry and bright. Temperatures around average, feeling colder in the south compared to recent days, and certainly feeling colder with the winds across Scotland and northeast England, which will slowly ease during the course of the night, and then with clear skies and lighter winds, it's going to turn frosty for pretty much all of us as we head into Friday. Still some wintry showers in the far north, so it could be icy here on Friday morning, but for many places, Friday's a day of sparkling winter sunshine. It'll cloud over a little from the west. There may just be one or two scattered showers, but for most, Friday looks dry and fine. Temperatures close to average, but the winds won't be as strong on Friday, but certainly it'll be a cold and frosty start. The weather warnings are all on the Met Office website if you want more details.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome along, I'm Mark Steyn, live on GB News TV and GB News Radio. Feel free to mix and match. Tonight, Niall Gardner will be here on the Genocide Olympics. It's Uyghur Wednesday. Do you like the way the crunch of hard-packed snow on the two-man luge drowns out the howls of the Uyghurs being tortured next door? Also, and not just in China, the elite's growing contempt for the masses, and in Scotland the masquerade goes on, and as always, the only part of the show we can't do without your questions and comments by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or by tweet at gbnews. Stump the Steyn is coming up, of course. All that's after Polly Middlehurst with the news.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening. Your top stories. Police investigating lockdown parties in Downing Street are to send out questionnaires to more than 50 people believed to have attended. It says Met officers are reviewing whether a Christmas quiz at number 10 may have breached coronavirus restrictions after a new image emerged in the newspapers. It was published by the Daily Mirror today, and the picture appears to show the Prime Minister alongside 3 staff members and wine and crisps. At the time, there was a ban on indoor social mixing between households, although they were at work. The Prime Minister says he expects to end all coronavirus restrictions, including the need for people to self-isolate a month early in England. Boris Johnson told MPs today he will present the government's Living with COVID plan after parliamentary recess later this month.
Provided the current encouraging trends in the data continue, it is my expectation that we will be able to end the last domestic restrictions, including the legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive, a full month early.
Boris Johnson. Well, the Prime Minister will fly to Poland tomorrow over the build-up of Russian forces near the Ukraine border. Boris Johnson's going to meet Poland's Prime Minister and President to reassure them about the UK's support for Eastern European allies. Earlier today, the Foreign Secretary landed in Moscow to meet with her Russian counterpart, saying Russia must immediately withdraw its forces or face the consequences. A man serving life in prison for killing his fiancée has been found guilty of murdering his first wife 6 years earlier. 61-year-old Ian Stewart killed children's author Helen Bailey at their home in Hertfordshire in 2016. After that conviction, police investigated the 2010 death of Stewart's first wife, Diane Stewart, in Cambridgeshire. Detective Superintendent Jerome Kent, who led the investigation, says Stewart showed no remorse.
He sat in mute silence during most of the interviews. I believe that he felt he was more intelligent and more superior to the officers that were investigating him.
In other news, the cats belonging to West Ham footballer Kurt Zouma are now in the care of the RSPCA. Zouma apologised yesterday after a video surfaced online of him kicking and slapping his cats. The RSPCA say they're investigating the incident. Meanwhile, West Ham, the football club itself, has fined the player, and the sportswear firm Adidas has ended its sponsorship deal with him. Now, scientists say they've made a huge step closer in making nuclear fusion energy a reality. Experts say recent experiments demonstrated the potential to deliver safe and sustainable low-carbon energy. Fusion energy is based on the same principle by which stars create heat and light. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+ with GB News. Now back to Mark Steyn.
No, we're not going to be doing Cakegate or whatever they're calling it these days, despite the emergence of a shocking new photograph showing Boris at one of these Zoom call Christmas quizzes. Have we got that? Have we got that photograph? I was stunned by this. It's well, if we don't have it, that's even better, because I wasn't that stunned by it. But the interesting thing about it, no, that's not it. The interesting thing about it is, save that one, I'm coming to that. The interesting thing about it is, actually I've forgotten the interesting thing about it, let's just get on with it. The Guardian tells us to be very scared by these ghastly, uncouth, working class trucker chappies in Canada. No. Now we're all out of order with everything. This is like, we're now dealing with that episode of Mastermind, the parody with Ronnie Corbett and Ronnie Barker, where whoever was being Magnus and whoever was the contestant answered the questions all out of sync. Can we go back and start with that first one from The Guardian again? Let's see that Guardian headline. I tell you what, why don't we just skip the monologue entirely and let's see. Have we got Alexandra? Alexandra Marshall, the editor of The Spectator. She's down in Australia. Is Alexandra there? Is Alexandra with us? Okay, we can go to Alexandra, because otherwise I'm going to sing selections from The Phantom of the Opera for the rest of the hour. Say you'll share with me one love, one lifetime. Okay, Alexandra, you're a little earlier than we had planned, but it's great to see you.
That is not how I thought I'd start my morning. That is not how I thought I'd be starting my morning today.
It's breakfast time in Australia. I apologise. Nobody wants to wake up to me singing selections from Phantom of the Opera. I should have done Les Miserables. I do apologise. Alexandra, you did a rather interesting piece in the Specky, and I wanted to just unpack it a little because it seems that around the world, governments are now they've told us COVID is like a war, but essentially they've decided to treat it as a war on large numbers of their own citizens. We've seen that in the reaction of the Canadian political class to those truckers. We've seen it in Australia, where your government's pledged $60-something million for so-called extremists, a term that's very poorly defined. We see it in America, where the Department of Homeland Security is now defining as domestic terrorists people who disagree with the government on its various COVID regulations. There's a sense that something is shifting here, and I thought your piece was quite interesting as to what that might actually be.
Well, there are two things that are happening. You're quite right. We have the war economy being invoked so that our state premiers and prime minister can use the threat of emergency to justify any sort of laws they want and the complete takeover of our economy. But there's also the whole of Western civilization has had this giant shift to the left. And that has happened over the last probably 10 to 15 years as Marxism has crept into our schools and our kids have started to be indoctrinated into collective thinking. And so, like climate change is a bit of a collective thinking, we've now got COVID, and my article talks about COVID as medical fascism, where it's all been framed as collectivist thought. We're all in this together, we all have to sacrifice for the greater good. And the name of my article is actually The Greater Good or a Grander Evil, trying to highlight how dangerous collectivist thought really is to the West, and how once you deperson individuals and you stop treating the individual as supreme in the legal and political system, you start to be able to justify all manner of ills towards a person and justify taking away their rights or even harming individuals to benefit the collective. And so that is what I was trying to explain to people who have so easily and willingly been led into supporting ruthless authoritarianism in Australia.
Yeah, and what I think is different about this COVID thing this time round is, the countries we've just been talking about, Britain, Canada, Australia, and even America. I mean, these are common law countries, and generally speaking, the great thing about common law was it didn't take a view on the collective. What mattered were individuals who were equal under the law, and we now have accepted all over the place in all kinds of matters that what matters is the collective opinion, as you said, and individuals who dissent from that, even if they're quite numerous, such as these Canadian truckers, are somehow inferior citizens. And in fact, I think if you look at this $60 million your government is proposing to crack down on extremists, basically now disagreeing with the government makes you suspicious and a person worthy of being surveilled by the government and having diminished rights. That's gone quite... Yes, that's just in 2 years of this thing.
Yes, I saw a quote that came through yesterday, which was, I think it was from Canada, that the freedom protesters had weaponized freedom. And I'm sorry, but if you think that people have weaponized freedom in a Western civilization democracy, then you have institutionalized authoritarianism. Because freedom should be the fundamental understanding of how our political systems work. But I must say there is hope coming. I saw yesterday the Canadians reenacting that scene in the Thomas Crown affair, the last heist to Nina Simone's Cinnamon, where they all brought the jerry cans in and trolled Trudeau's attempt to ban fuel to the protesters. Now, I wish Australia was doing that, but our protests are not as large at the moment because places like New South Wales, we have started dropping some of our mandates, even though Western Australia is getting worse. So you may see more protests from us in the future.
Yeah, I saw, I think, a story about this extremism thing on SBS. SBS is a government-funded broadcaster in Australia. I think they get over 80% of their funding from the state in one form or another. And they had a picture illustrating the sort of extremists that your government is going to be cracking down on. One of them was holding a placard saying, "I want to work." Another guy was holding the Australian flag. Obviously, that's some kind of neo-colonial imperialist flag. We can't have that. The guy next to him, obviously, you know, any real caring person in Australia would be holding the Aboriginal flag, say. Well, the guy next to him was holding the Aboriginal flag. So apparently that makes him an extremist too. And then some other person was saying we shouldn't be jabbing minors. In other words, they feel a bit iffy about sticking needles in the arms of kids who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. These are now extremists to be cracked down on. I don't think this is going to end up in any kind of good place if this is the thinking of the people who control the government.
No, well, the problem is our politicians made a fatal mistake at the beginning of the pandemic. They decided to frame the COVID story as their responsibility. So they took on board the responsibility of COVID cases at the beginning. And so as COVID spread, as it naturally would, being a respiratory virus, they saw a rise in cases as a reflection on their governorship. And so once that happened, they were able to justify ever more increasing emergency orders and tyrannical orders in order to preserve their leadership. And once something like that becomes political, you have a serious problem because they can't admit they were wrong because they'll be punished in the polls. They can't let COVID run its natural course because that will reflect poorly on them. And so anybody who attempts to exercise their freedom or, you know, they just want to work, most people, well, they become terrorists in the eyes of the government because they're attacking their regime rather than questioning the nature of the pandemic and the right way to go about combating it. And so that's what's happened across many of our countries, including yours, I believe. But yes, this terror law, we had terror laws passed in Australia like the US and like the UK, and they weren't specific to, for example, Islamic terror. They were general. And so they've been able to apply those laws to freedom protesters by saying that freedom protesters are endangering the population, therefore they can invoke terror laws. And that's how this has happened and how you saw that news article come about.
Are you actually concerned about that? Because basically the new paradigm now is that all the laws that were brought in the wake of 9/11 are in order supposedly to deal with guys sitting in a cave in Afghanistan going Allahu Akbar and plotting to take out skyscrapers. They're now being turned against citizens of Western nations. This idea that the large numbers of the civilian population are a threat to domestic tranquility is actually quite outrageous after what people have put up with over the last 2 years.
It's outrageous to suggest that the group of people who are trying to restore our constitutional rights, to restore civil liberty, and to preserve our legal system and our privacy laws and our workplace contracts, they're somehow terrorists. That would be the reverse of what a terrorist would be attempting to do. But yes, a lot of us have been concerned from the very start about how vague these laws are. And there have been new laws that have been passed in the last 2 years for the pandemic, which were framed as digital terror laws, but really they allow the government to stalk, track, and invade people's computers if they have a disparaging view of the government, which they're now classifying as terror, basically. So they're getting worse. There's more laws than when they were passed in 9/11.
Yeah, and that's what it actually is. Disagreeing with the government can get you put on a watch list now. In the United Kingdom, in the Dominion of Canada, in the Commonwealth of Australia. Absolutely disgraceful that this stuff is going on. Thank you for writing about it. If you want to read Alexandra's piece, you can do so in The Spectator Down Under. You can go to the comparatively weedier UK Spectator. I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to their faces, Alexandra. And I think they've got a link to the Australian edition down there. You know it's true, Alexandra. You guys have been a rock during this thing, and the London end is pitiful. You're carrying those guys. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and we hope to see you again. Great to see you. Thank you. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can ask me anything for Stump the Steyn. You can tweet me at GBNews if you are a Twitter aficionado. We will have Uyghur Wednesday coming up because China's taking the gold in genocide, and that's pretty impressive. And we have Brian Monteith on Nicola Sturgeon's COVID Without End, all straight ahead on your Thursday Steyn Show.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Okay, let's get to your comments. Darren says, if the New World Order, the New World Order actually, Darren, I know what you mean. I think George W. Bush was the first guy, not George W. Bush, his dad. That's how long, maybe his granddad. It goes back a long way. But that's a phrase he came up with at the time that the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact were imploding. So it's like 30 years ago now. And it's actually, I think, something a lot more sinister than a New World Order, because what he meant by it was a kind of, fluffy bunny globalist arrangement, benign globalist arrangement. And in fact, as I was just talking about with Alexandra, it's a lot more openly sinister. Where we have Western governments now whose basic loyalty is to, we have elites whose loyalty is to other elites rather than their people. But Darren says, if the New World Order gain more of a foothold, what we're seeing in the Canadian government now will become commonplace across the world. Canada, like the UK, is a sovereign country. Those elected are responsible to their voters, not the reverse. Yeah, one of the things we weren't able to bring you at the top of the show, which is a bit of a pity, is the Ottawa coppers beating the crap out of a 78-year-old, 4'10" great-grandfather who had committed the crime of driving past the truckers and giving a supportive toot on his horn. So the coppers pull him over He's 4'10", this guy. He's 78. He's a great-grandfather. And there are, I think it takes 2 coppers to get the 4'10" guy to the ground and rough him up and manhandle him. Somehow, the idea has taken hold in Washington, in Ottawa, in Canberra, in Brussels, that it is the citizenry who are the enemy, as opposed to the real enemy, China, which has got away with unleashing this thing on the world. Rex says, if our student elites have nothing better to complain about than pronouns and statues, then things must be pretty good, surely. Well, you know, they're very selective about statues, aren't they? Those fellas who got away with taking down the statue of Colston in Bristol and the statue of Queen Victoria at the Manitoba legislature. I always think you can tell a lot about a country, whether it's still got statues of Queen Victoria up there. A lot of places wouldn't exist had it not been for Queen Victoria's reign. You can debate that, but you know it's true. Anyway, a bunch of ahistorical nitwits tore down the statue of Queen Victoria at the Manitoba legislature, and the wimps in whatever it's called, the Manitoba Department of Justice, are not going to... So there's certain things you can... There's certain statues you should feel free just to tear down. People think this is ushering in the new utopia. No, it's not. It's ushering in what will be the prelude to the actual new utopia. So people are worried about pronouns and people are worried about statues. And then when we have destroyed our entire history and the new guys take over, no one is going to be talking about pronouns and statues, because the new regime, when it's a Chinese world and we're just living in it, is not going to be worried about. They're not going to care about your pronouns. When you're in a Uyghur concentration camp, boys and girls, no one can hear you announcing your pronouns. Tom says, now China is in bed with Russia. What can we do? Well, the one thing we could have done is not let Russia get into bed with China. One of the things that is so bizarre about this is that it wouldn't have taken a lot. Well, by the way, Russia is a part of the West. It's like the West's prodigal son. But you look at it, Tolstoy, Chekhov, Tchaikovsky, Gogol. Gogol, he's the greatest short story writer of all time. If you don't know who Gogol is, I'm not going to tell you. Google Gogol. If that doesn't work, Gogol Google. But we had the chance to woo Russia away, and instead the incompetents, mainly in Washington, mainly in the Democrat Party, have managed to drive Putin into a malign alliance with Chairman Xi, which is why he's not invading Ukraine during the Winter Olympics, because it might be a bummer and detract from all the ice dancing. So you're not going to appreciate the triple axels because they're going to be showing Putin's troops marching into Ukraine. That's how stupid we are. That's how stupid we are. You know, Russia has not been at any point in its history a reliable member of the West in terms of political stability and political norms and constitutional evolution. But it is culturally, and to drive it into the arms of Chairman Xi was a huge mistake. Now, all around the world, including in England and possibly Northern Ireland, restrictions are being lifted on the COVID. In fact, England is rather spectacularly leading the way on this. So the list now gets longer by the day. It's not just England, but also Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Alberta, Saskatchewan. And the narrative subtly shifts too. The world-famous Children's Hospital of Philadelphia now recommends against masks for children because it's not good for the kids, as was pretty obvious about 6 weeks into this thing. And is more than obvious now that after 2 years, this is basically a form of child abuse. In Scotland, though, masks remain obligatory for school pupils, even as First Minister Nicola Sturgeon prepares to saw off the bottom of every classroom door to improve airflow. Because if you know anything about air, it's that it always likes to drop to the bottom of the floor, and then it's happiest about 2 inches above the floor, and then it likes to go under the door. Air is basically like a big limbo dance. It can't wait to get under that Scottish classroom door. So now Nicola Sturgeon is proposing to saw off the bottom of every Scottish schoolhouse door to improve airflow. Gee, I managed to read that with a straight face. Can I get a BAFTA Best Actor nomination? Here now is Brian Monteith, former member of the Scottish and European Parliaments. Brian, what is happening in England where all of this stuff is being tossed out through the unsawn door in a couple of weeks' time, doesn't seem to be happening in Scotland anytime soon?
Well, it does seem absolutely bizarre that you need to actually cut the bottoms of doors, but actually, ministers have written papers actually explaining this is a necessity. They've earmarked over £300,000 to pay for it. And everybody, as soon as it was said, realised what a nonsense and what fools we're being made of in Scotland. Well, fortunately, most Scots seem to think it was such a laugh that they just turned all their laughter back onto the SNP.
Now, what I want to know is whether she's got plans to do anything with the bottom 2 inches of every single door. Is there going to be a Scottish National Museum of door bottoms on an outlying Shetland island?
Well, I'm not very tall, but neither is Nicola Sturgeon. Maybe she thinks it could be useful for standing on when she's speaking to television cameras, as she's been known to do in the past. Of course, what they are also doing, as well as cutting the bottom of doors, is seeking to keep masks in the classroom. And this, of course, is actually really about giving in to the teaching unions. The SNP has always been beholden to the teaching unions, thinking this is the way to power, and it certainly helped work for them. And since we've had the COVID pandemic, the whole approach has been in schools to do what the teaching union says. And that's why we still have that situation in Scotland. But in England and elsewhere in the UK, it has been ignored because the unions have been ignored.
Yeah, but there's something a little more than that going on, I think, because in America, for example, where the Democrat Party is beholden to the ghastly American teachers' unions, but they're now backing off masking kids because they finally understood from looking at their internal poll numbers that when you're actually tormenting and torturing kids for 8 hours a day, it does nothing for your poll numbers, and you realise you're going to lose a whole bunch of seats, which they think is going to happen to them in November. So they're backing off the whole mask thing. Is the reality of Scottish politics that Nicola Sturgeon can keep kids in masks for another year and not suffer a political hit for it?
Well, I do think there is an aspect where there is just not enough serious opposition to the SNP in the Scottish Parliament, or even then out in the streets. Although there are many marches held and people write to the media, write letters and so on. But another aspect to that is not just the difficulty of speaking out and raising opposition to Sturgeon. It is also that in the United States, a lot of these rules were governed by the different states. So the states actually, in a sense, could compete with what they were able to do. And states that had got rid of the masks could be compared with states that had kept them. And as governors and legislators could see that the public was turning against masks, they too quickly had to change. But of course, in Scotland, it's not the councils that determine whether the masks are worn, it's Nicola Sturgeon and her government. And so there is no competition, there is no comparison. People only can accept what she's offering.
But are the is it your sense that the Scottish people and Scottish parents in particular, I mean, the figures for depression among children, for increased suicide attempts among children, and as well as just the basic fact that they haven't learned anything these last 2 years. Their socialization skills have all gone to hell because you can't read if you can't, read your friends and your teacher's face. Is there no general concern about that among the populace?
Oh, I think there is a growing concern about it because in the sense of getting a comparison, what we saw before Christmas was the approach being taken in England about going for Plan B, and that was still meant restrictions. But Nicola Sturgeon jumped the gun. She introduced greater restrictions even before knowing what Omicron would be like, and she shut many places down. And when we had that period in Scotland where we had greater restrictions, including the use of masks and no use of masks in England, we could see that, in fact, the outcomes in England were better. Now, that should not have happened if Sturgeon's law was correct. It should have been the other way around. So I think I come back to my point. When people can see comparisons and make their own judgments, they can see that Nicola Sturgeon's law is wrong. And so the opposition amongst the public, I feel, has been growing.
So you think, I mean, I'm not saying, we're going to see anything like these Canadian truckers or Belgian farmers or the people on the streets of Vienna. By comparison, Scotland seems a little quiet on that front, but you think there's a growing dissatisfaction with this?
No, I think there has been. It's been seen also in rejection of the vaccine mandates that were meant to be coming along. There was objections to the shutting down of hospitality, and these have manifested themselves in demonstrations that have been greater in number, it has to be said, than demonstrations in favour of Scottish secession from the UK. So there's a message for the SNP. Their message is less popular than actually abolishing masks and restrictions. People want liberty, and they want liberty from Sturgeon's laws.
Well, that's the very least I'd expect. I can't see the slightest point in seceding from the United Kingdom to live in Nicola Sturgeon's prison state. The last time anybody seceded from the UK, our friends south of the border in Ireland, they called it the Irish Free State. You couldn't give any kind of name like that to the country Nicola Sturgeon is running right now, could you?
Well, there's no doubt about it that what we've seen over the last 2 years is the revelation that many people just were unaware of just how authoritarian and how statist the Scottish National Party is, in particular under Nicola Sturgeon, because we've seen a drift towards it, by the way. We saw the centralisation of the 8 different police forces across Scotland into one about 11 years ago. And so we've seen a drift towards greater centralisation into Edinburgh, less power in the other cities and towns and neighbourhoods. And this authoritarian rule is suited to that centralisation. It has effectively meant that we can see Nicola Sturgeon has become power drunk. She is drunk on the power and wants to keep it to extend the COVID laws and the COVID powers.
No, I'm glad you brought up the amalgamation of all those Scottish constabularies, because in a strange way that prefigured the centralised one-size-fits-all COVID regime. And Police Scotland, or whatever stupid name it has, actually is one of the worst police forces in this country when it comes to just sitting around and hectoring people for their tweets all day instead of solving any crimes. Thank you very much, Brian. And next time you've worked for the Botswanan government, and coming and then dealing with Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish government, you must wish you were back in a first world government like Botswana's again after dealing with Nicola Sturgeon. So we'll have you on to talk about that next time. Thank you very much, Brian. Up next, we have Niall Gardner on China, the Olympics and us. Plus your questions. Stump the Steyn. You can ask me anything. GB Views at gbnews.uk or via Twitter at gbnews.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight is the online safety bill which seeks to criminalise so-called COVID disinformation, the biggest danger to free speech and a return to normality yet. Silky Carlo, the director of Big Brother Watch, explains why you should care about this latest shocking assault on our civil liberties. On a week of bombshells and milestones, Robert Jobson gives his verdict on the latest royal headlines in Crown Jewels. Plus, GB News star Darren Grimes sounds off on an issue that matters to you, and I break down the day's biggest headlines with my superstar panel. The Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platel, social media activist Adam Brooks, and political commentator Daisy McAndrew. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
We Go Wednesday on the Mark Steyn Show. We're going to be running this all through the Chinese Olympics. As I've said, you shouldn't be watching Chairman Xi's disgusting Olympics, and the media shouldn't be covering it, or not as a sporting event. Look, that's curling. That lady was curling there, not this guy. I love curling, but this isn't about curling. This isn't about figure skating. If you like figure skating, you'll love the way everyone's skating around the hard figure on how many Uyghurs the Chinese Communist Party has actually killed. Well, sometimes being a blood-soaked totalitarian dictatorship counts for more than how exciting the two-man luge is. And that's particularly important when the blood-soaked totalitarian dictatorship is on course to become the world's dominant power. The director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, Niall Gardner, has written about the issue in The Telegraph, he says. And in the background of the genocide games, China has been aligning itself strategically to combat its greatest foe in Europe, Brexit Britain. Niall, it's great to see you, and this is the shot across the bows that the Chairman Xi has given by saying he fully supports Argentine sovereignty in the Falkland Islands.
Well, Mark, thanks very much for having me on the show today. Great to be here. And thank you as well for highlighting my latest piece, The Telegraph, where I talk about China's latest saber rattling against the United Kingdom. And their latest target, of course, is the Falkland Islands and the 2,000 or so British inhabitants of the Falkland Islands. And China has been siding with Argentina and supporting Argentina's claims, completely unlawful claims, it has to be said, over the Falklands. And so this is just the latest example, I think, of China sort of taking a swipe at Great Britain. And why are the Chinese doing this? It's because they see Britain really as a growing threat, actually, to their interests on the international stage. And Great Britain outside of the European Union, I think, is a far stronger force on the world stage. You know, freed of the shackles of the EU, Britain certainly is a greater adversary for the Chinese. They recognize that. And so we're going to see, I think, a whole series of efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to attack British interests. And the Falkland Islands are the latest example of that.
Well, they certainly seem to like the look of the Commonwealth. And if you look at what they're setting aside Hong Kong, for example, which I do think that is something that the government could push back on more. But if you look at the Solomon Islands, which they're basically subverting, if you look at the port deal, the 99-year port deal in Sri Lanka, if you look at the airport deal they've got in Uganda, if you look at the $1 billion they've managed to spend in Antigua, you know, which is has a very small it's hard to spend $1 billion on anything in Antigua. I mean, basically, there seems to be, even amidst all their global strategy, they seem to think that undermining British interests around the world is somehow worth their time. What do you think the reason underpinning all that is?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And as you've pointed out, China has targeted numerous Commonwealth countries, and there are at least 54 nations still part of what used to be known as the British Commonwealth, now called the Commonwealth. And China actually is operating as the world's, you know, biggest imperial power today. And unlike the British Empire, the Chinese Empire is not a benevolent empire at all. And the Chinese basically are exploiting countries across the Commonwealth for their own economic interests, of course. And China is turning its fire on Britain because, unlike our European partners in France and Germany and Brussels, for example, the British are standing up strongly against Chinese interests. You look at what the British are doing over Hong Kong, for example, the British standing up to China in the South China Sea and across the international stage, whereas, you know, our European, weak-kneed partners are actually doing their best to appease the Chinese dragon. And if you look, for example, at the recent EU investment deal with Beijing, it is a supreme act of appeasement. And it's what the Europeans do best, which is, bow down to the likes of Russia and China, as we're also seeing on the Ukraine front with Emmanuel Macron, groveling to Putin and basically shining his boots over the Ukraine issue.
Well, China thinks it's all going swimmingly at the moment. They think these Olympics are going very well for them. I mean, it's astonishing to look at people like Savannah Guthrie, who's a big-time presenter on NBC's Today Show in America, and she sounds like she could be reading press releases from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, you brought up appeasement. And if we go back, people make these kind of glib comparisons between these games and the 1936 Olympics in Germany. But there is a difference because, you know, Germany was given those games, I think in 1931, something like that, before, you know, 2-3 years before Hitler and the Nazis came to power. So it was a kind of more accidental embarrassment than what's happening now. And what's slightly disturbing to me is the projection of weakness by so many other Western powers in the face of this huge propaganda coup for Peking.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's an absolute disgrace that China is hosting the Winter Olympics. This is a genocidal regime. It is the enemy of the free world. You have over 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in Xinjiang province at the moment. China's human rights record is absolutely appalling. And yet you see, you know, US and international corporations lavishing hundreds of millions of dollars on, you know, advertising coverage actually of the Winter Olympics. And it's absolutely disgusting and despicable to see this groveling before the Chinese Communist Party. You've even seen journalists actually literally being carted off on air by communist officials.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. There was a Dutch journalist who was basically dragged off camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you.
Appalling and frightening as well.
Yeah. No. I think so. Is it just economic? You were talking about the difference that Britain is in, the slightly different position. Is it no more complicated than the fact that China has neglected to buy up quite as many people in the UK as it has bought in, say, the United States or in continental Europe? I mean, the California Democrat Party, for example, starting with its longtime senator, I mean, the links that go there to the Chinese Communist Party, going back now a generation, and that may be why suddenly they're not interested in even talking about anything that China's doing anymore.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because I think the tentacles of the Chinese Communist Party run deep through the United States, throughout much.
Oh, I think we've got.
Mark, you're
carry on, Niall. We're back with you.
Yes, thank you. You're now seeing, for example, the British government turfing, China's biggest telecommunications company, Huawei, out of the UK telecoms market. Some other European countries are following suit. The reality is that, China is operating really with an extraordinary degree of influence, actually, in the West. And it is only now that we're seeing, the fight back beginning. But there's a huge amount of work to be done, and one only has to look at, for example, China's degree of control and influence at Hollywood to see the extent of Chinese power in the heart of the West. When Tom Cruise can't make Top Gun 2 without fear of offending the Chinese Communist Party, it's a sad day when that happens, actually. So we have to be on our guard. We have to recognize the Chinese government for what it is, a monumental threat to the free world. We have to confront the Chinese Communist Party at every opportunity.
The interesting thing, if you compare this with the Ukrainian situation, Vladimir Putin's very old school there. He's got 100,000 troops massing on the Ukrainian border, and everyone's talking about it because this is how we're used to hegemonic, aggressive powers behaving. Whereas China is managing to snaffle up the planet basically without firing a shot. And it seems to have figured out that, for example, controlling Hollywood or controlling Western universities and these other sort of cultural levers of power may actually be a better way to take over the world than just marching your troops across borders the way Putin's talking about.
Well, there's certainly the Chinese approach at the moment, basically. It's largely, I would say, through economic tactics. It's largely through perhaps, cultural infiltration. We see that in universities, not only in the United States, but also in the UK and across Europe as well. But at the same time, the Chinese are actively siding with the Russians over the Ukraine issue. They're siding with the terrorist regime in Iran. And so, China's also exercising a great degree of strategic support for its allies who are prepared to use terrorism and military force. And I think also in the coming decades, increasingly, China itself will be willing to use military might and power as well. So we have to combat China's power and influence on multiple fronts, including on the military front as well in the decades to come.
Well, keep talking about this in Washington, Niall. I heard some Pentagon big shot today saying that if this carries on, in 15 years' time, China could be in a position to challenge America. I think if he's thinking this is going to be a problem in the year 2037, he's not really prioritizing it the way he should, because it's happening now. Niall, it's always good to see you from the Margaret Thatcher Center in Washington. What a fantastic name for a centre. I'm envious that Niall got to that first. Let's get to some of your questions before we close things out here on Stump the Steyn. What are we going to do? Oh, here, Vivian. Oh, this is something I mentioned on yesterday's show. Why did the Crown Prosecution Service destroy the Jimmy Savile files? You know something? The BBC, do you know the BBC? Well, I was listening to the BBC. That was my first mistake. Then they announce that Boris Johnson has made a false claim that Keir Starmer did nothing about Jimmy Savile. Why is it a false claim? The Crown, when he was alive, and the Crown Prosecution Service was being run by Keir Starmer, nothing happened to Jimmy Savile. We could have put that guy in jail for what he was doing while he was alive, instead of waiting till after he was dead, when he doesn't really care too much about it. But Keir Starmer's Crown Prosecution Service didn't do anything about it. Why is the BBC presuming to say this is a false claim? Are they suggesting that Keir Starmer's Crown Prosecution Service did prosecute Jimmy Savile? And if they're so convinced that it's nothing to do with Keir Starmer, how do you know that? Because all the files on Jimmy Savile were conveniently destroyed. The BBC is now just peddling. What's false is the BBC's claim that saying that Keir Starmer didn't prosecute Jimmy Savile is a false claim. But why be surprised? Because they were the Beeb were Jimmy's enablers for 4 decades, basically. OK, Ian says, if one boss says another boss is responsible and should apologise, but that one boss says he's not responsible despite apologising, which one is the hypocrite? Well, they're both the same, aren't they, in terms of, Boris Johnson doesn't know that his minions underling is inviting people to a Christmas party, and Keir Starmer doesn't know that his minions underling isn't prosecuting Jimmy Savile. Although I happen to think that Sir Keir did know. Here's another one. Why do people wear masks in their cars when they are on their own? Because a mask protects you from you giving yourself the Omicron variant. That's the easiest way to get COVID, is to give it to yourself. That'll do it for me. Dan Wootton is up next to give it some Wednesday welly, as only he can. You know he's got a great lineup of guests and you won't want to miss it. See you tomorrow. Stay safe, stay free, keep it on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. Welcome to your latest update from the Met Office. Some wintry weather across Scotland, strong winds and some snow flurries as well. And across Northern Ireland, it could turn quite icy tonight. There's a cold front across the south of England. That's bringing a bit of rain and drizzle here and there, but it's further north where we've got the cold air already, and the combination of these weather fronts and this area of low pressure that could bring some pretty nasty conditions to parts of Scotland. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place.